Hello poetry students, we were just discussing sonnets in the last video, and as I said, there are literally thousands of verse form poets, types of verse form poems, and we're just scratching the surface. So we looked at a sonnet. There are examples of two interesting verse forms in the textbook that I've assigned for today. If you turn to the Elizabeth Bishop poem on 957 that's called Sestina. This is an example of a sestina. And if you look at this poem, you'll see the division of stanzas here. You have 6 lines per stanza for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas. So you have 6 sestet stanzas, and then the final stanza at the very bottom of the page is a tercet. And these are the rules for anyone trying to write a sestina. Okay, it has to have 6 sestet stanzas followed by what the Italians call an envoy, which is a tercet. In order to write a sestina, you have to follow that form. So there's an example of a sestina, and I think they're coming back into fashion. I'm seeing people trying to do more rhymed poems and rhymed form poems these days. It fell out of vogue for a while, but it seems to be a little bit revived. I'm seeing more poets sort of going back to this because it's sort of challenging and fun. And then if you turn to 955, which is a couple of pages before, the very, very famous Dylan Thomas poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. And I'm sure that you've heard this poem before. I think it's been recited in a number of films. And you can probably even think of examples of where you've heard this poem. It has a very strong rhythm, a lot of repetitions, and that's because it is a villanelle. And this is a French type of verse rhymed poem. Notice as you look at this poem the grouping of stanzas again. You have a tercet, a tercet, a tercet, a tercet, a tercet, then a quatrain. So you have to have 5 tercets and a quatrain. But the rules don't end there. In the tercets, the rhyming scheme has to be ABA. So let's check it. Night, day, light, ABA. Right, they, night, ABA. Bright bay light, flight way night, sight gay light, all ABA. So he's kept the rules so far. The final quatrain has to be a BBA. Let's look at it. Height, pray, night, light. Slightly different. He's changed it. Height, A. Sorry, that's B. Pray, A. Night, B. Light, B. So he's changed a little bit at the end. Instead of having A B B A, he's got B A B B. So he's slightly shifted it, but he's loosely following the rules of a villanelle. And I wanted to show you this just as to give you an idea of how stringent some of these verse forms can be. Sometimes they have to do with the number of syllables per line. Sometimes they have to do with certain ordering of rhymes as well. Which leads me to the challenge for this particular video. There is a popular verse form that comes out of Ireland that's called a limerick, and you've probably heard of this before. And it's called a limerick because it comes from the town Limerick in Ireland. And most limericks, and you'll recognize the style when I recite a couple to you, most limericks are kind of dirty or bawdy, and you know, I would be embarrassed to recite them to you. Oh, what the hell, I'll give you one. There was a young man from Madras whose balls were made out of brass. They jingled together, they played stormy weather, and lightning shot out of his ass. That kind of poem, sort of told in taverns and pubs in Ireland, and then sort of became very popular. We used to write them when I was young. You may have come across them. These are the rules, okay? It has to be 5 lines. It has to be AABBA. So you have to follow that rhyme scheme. But there are more rules. The A lines must have 7 syllables. The B lines must have 5 syllables. I have a number written down on my notes here from previous classes, just to give you an example. A couple of classes ago, I had somebody in the class named Greg. And what we would do if we were in a class is write some of these together. But we have to do it via video. So here's the limerick I wrote in class for Greg. There was a young fellow named Greg. Notice the rhythm. There was a young fellow named Greg. 7. Or there was a young man named Greg. 7 syllables. Who ate a odd-colored egg. 7 syllables. He bit off the shell. 5. It tasted like hell. 5. So he washed it down with a keg. 7. So you get this rhythm. Da 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 da, and that's a limerick. Here's another example. There was a young man named Seth. Said poetry bored him to death. He couldn't stand rhyme. He'd rather do mime, like a squirrel strung out on meth. Or there was a young lady named Leah, for whom poetry held no fear. She read it in class whenever I ask, and then she goes out for a beer. So you can hear the sort of the rhythm. And what I want you to do as a response to this video, to indicate your presence to this class, is simply write a limerick. It's helpful to always start out with a name. It kind of gets the thing going. So you can do it about a friend or even me, I don't care. But see if you can write a limerick in the notes to this, in the chat section of this video, and then maybe we can all make a comment on each other's. It would be kind of fun. I'm trying to encourage that interchange, which I'm going to enforce when we get to the next week in the poetry presentations. So it would be good to practice. But see if you can write a limerick and put it in the section based on those rules. The last form of poetry has nothing to do with rhyme or content, and these are poems determined by visual elements. So if you turn to page 961, I'll be very quick about this. 961, look at the George Herbert poem Easter Wings, and this was written in 1633. How did they do that? It would have been a single press, and they had to line up the type just like that. But you can see the poet is written in the shape of wings, and this was the first example of its kind. And then as technology developed, it became very, very popular. If you turn to 962, pages are stuck together here, you can see the May Swenson poem here, and you can see how the words sort of cascade down the page, and you're trained to read it right to left. So it would be woman or they, should be, pedestals, little horses. But then you realize, maybe I should read top to bottom. Women should be pedestals moving to the motions of men. But there are no rules. You can read it any which way and get many different meanings out of the poem. And this spawned something called the calligram, or graphic poems, which have become more and more complex as we have developed the ability to set type digitally. And so people have gone to town with this idea and come up with all kinds of stuff. There was a famous French poet named Apollinaire who shaped a poem in the shape of the Eiffel Tower during the Second World War, and basically it told the Germans to F off. But he did it in an artful way. So this is the last sort of example of forms of poetry. Poetry to be looked at, poetry that's architectural, poetry that's not sort of meant to be recited or read. It's meant to be viewed on the page, so it does something different than poetry that preceded it, and it brings in a visual element. I just wanted to show you a quick example of that. So I'm sorry this ran into 2 videos. It's really hard to keep this to 15 minutes. The next class is on rhythm and meter. I am going to send you a document to help explain that. So please, you don't need to print it out, just have it on your screen or somewhere where you can see it, or look it over beforehand, and it'll help illustrate what I'm talking about, because these 2 classes are the most technical, and you may need to watch sections back again to understand what's going on. Alright, so I'll see you in that video, which will be coming shortly.